This is a podcast where experts in movement and life tackle current concepts in health and wellness and use science and evidence as the foundation of how we discuss each topic. This is not medical advice, but a sedentary lifestyle is much more harmful, so we should move. The Motif Experience, where movement and life come together. I'm your host, Dr. Tyler Cuddeford.
Tyler.
Yes.
You're in the guest chair again.
I'm in the guest chair, yes.
This feels like a very powerful seat to be in.
Well, you do have control over questions. You can throw me under the bus.
You know.
That is potential possibility for, your spot.
Yeah, no, that's great. It's going to be nice, though, because you actually know a whole heck of a lot more about this, so I don't know how I can throw you under a bus, because so we're talking about footwear today.
We're talking about footwear, yes.
Which is so fun.
I thought we'd do a two-part series. One would be footwear construction, footwear basics, things like that, manufacturing, maybe materials, components, those kinds of things. So I brought some for those that might be seeing the video. I do have a bunch of samples, but we'll try to talk through those so that if you're not seeing the video, just listening to the podcast, you'll be able to kind of follow along.
If you have a chance to see the video, definitely check it out on our YouTube channel. It's linked on our podcast show notes, linked on our website. But you have a background in footwear creation. In fact, actually give some of your background, because those are some of the most fun stories. You came from Nike to start this PT program. If you didn't listen to Tyler's intro podcast, make sure you listen to that. But just give us a brief description of some of the things you did at Nike.
Yeah, my history there was a little over 5 years, so I wasn't there a lot necessarily, but I got to play in a lot of different areas. So I started there as a researcher for basketball, so my primary responsibility was looking at the influence that performance had on, or footwear had on performance, footwear had on injuries, mechanisms, things like that. Enjoyed my time in the lab, enjoyed the people in the lab that were wonderful to work with. Top of the pile footwear, sports biomechanists, and I took the position because it was like a postdoc, getting my PhD, and then learning from some of the founders really of footwear biomechanics and running injuries and mechanisms. So started off in basketball. Well, actually spent most of my time in basketball, but started off in the research lab and instrumental in testing a lot of footwear and a lot of different kinds of cushioning systems, what worked, what didn't, shoe stability components. So what makes an upper, we'll talk about what an upper is, but what makes an upper more stable, what makes a footwear too stiff, can you minimize energy loss in a shoe, because what happens really that foam deforms, and so can you minimize that energy loss? I worked in the basketball innovation group, so that was BIG, so I was Big Tyler, and there was a Big Kevin, there was lots of people, a handful. So our job was to we had we wondered if we could design a shoe that would be banned by the NBA because it made you jump too high. So it was kind of fun.
Yeah.
With that, of course, worked with marketing folks in basketball, so instrumental in helping sign a number of Nike's signature basketball athletes. And that was really fun.
Name drops. Who are Nike signatures?
Yeah, so Kobe, LeBron, Carmelo, that group of people coming into Nike at that time. I was on those teams with helping, sell the Nike. So what kinds of services could we provide, being a large footwear company, but also had in the back of their pockets, if you will, physical therapists, biomechanists, a sports research lab that was out of control in every way.
In all of that.
Yeah, so I did. Cool. So I fit well with who they were looking for. Like I said, enjoyed my time in the lab.
So when you're saying lab, I'm picturing not your classic white trench coat, clipboard. What was the lab like at Nike?
Yes, clearly state of the art. Had a runway track in the middle of the lab that was nearly 100 meters with force plates embedded into the floor, into the track. They had a basketball floor that you could put together and put force plates in the middle, and they had basketball hoops, so we would build the floor, put the force plates in there, put the hoop up. You know, in basketball you could switch it to tennis. They had a tennis floor, soccer, goals, and turf, and infrared cameras, electromyography, you know, some laser directed footwear, so you could, they had a foot scanner, so you could scan the foot and then convert that foot to a point cloud, understand foot morphology, and see if we could do a better job with fit, so how well a shoe will fit. They had a environmental chamber, so I was there when they first started the Oregon project, and so they put the environmental chamber in to look at the influence that heat and humidity had on garments, and so, and then trying to develop garments that would wick away moisture and keep you cooler during a run, especially long distance running. So was involved in some of that testing, metabolic testing, you know, with some of the exercise physiologists there, worked with some of the athletes early on in the Oregon project. Yeah, I mean, the list goes on and on. I had a great time. From there, I went to materials. So I took a gig at, I guess my technical title was materials consultant. So really strategic raw material sourcing. So learned all about textiles, non-wovens, wovens, synthetic leather, you know, those kinds of things on shoe construction, and you know, went overseas a lot to help develop materials. So that was also part of my job, is to invent materials that would speak to the story that these athletes were trying to tell with their footwear, or the designers were trying to tell these stories with their design, and so I matched that with materials. Toward the end, they gave me some projects for footwear development, so that would be the engineering piece of that, so taking the concept of design and moving it to manufacturing, and getting it to, you know, that liaison between design and manufacturing. And so I did that. So I was really fortunate to you know, kind of have a loose rein for lots of different projects. Created a number of different kinds of cushioning systems, and was able to design it on the computer. You could send it downstairs. You could get a mold made. Then you could get a polyurethane. You could get it injected, and so you could actually make a physical model of a cushioning system. I would go across the hall and then make some shoes. Jeez. So
convenient.
That was really fun. I like to build things. I like to create things. So that fit who I was for sure at the time. So the materials piece, I did learn a lot about construction of materials. So how synthetics are made and developed, how synthetic leather is made and developed, how leather is processed and cured and then used in footwear, the different components of that. Yeah, so that's my background.
So you literally know the process from developing the shoe, the idea of developing the shoe, and how to follow through with the whole manufacturing process.
Yeah, manufacturing process, and then the testing. So did lots of you know, testing of various cushioning systems, upper design, stability control, traction elements, you know, all of that with, you know, outsoles and midsoles and uppers. Yeah, I mean, I don't have a ton of experience necessarily. I wasn't there 30 years. You know, didn't get the tattoo, but I enjoyed my time. They treated me well. Traveled the world, met a ton of people, and I've said this before. At the end of the day, it just wasn't me. I enjoyed working with the athletes. But the 5 things that are number one, mortality, the things that kill us, the top 5 are preventable. And so for me, it was a switch for being able to think differently about health, different about my background in biomechanics, but also in physical therapy and addressing, broader needs, societal needs of health. Yeah. So that just fit me better.
Yeah.
But I learned a ton while I was there and had a lot of fun.
Yeah, this information is actually going to be really helpful for a lot of those sneakerheads, PTs, and health professionals that work with runners or work with just people in general that have questions about shoes, maybe misconceptions about shoes.
Yeah.
I know we're going to get into a lot of that next week with the part 2, but tell us about footwear. Like, where do we even start?
Yeah, I think maybe just a basic understanding is going to help with the shoe components and what makes up a shoe, and then how maybe those components were made or developed.
Yeah.
And so, if you could imagine, a factory, has hundreds of sewing machines, and they're making an upper. So I didn't necessarily unstitch an upper, but the upper is the part of the shoe on the dorsum part, the top part of your foot, where the laces go. Yeah. So that's the upper, and there's different parts of the upper. I don't know if we can need to get into those details, but that particular part of footwear is crucially important in its construction, so that it fits the footwear properly. It fits the midsole and outsole properly. So that's usually sewn together, and you can have many pieces. So I'm wearing the. You and I are both wearing the Cortez.
Twins.
And so this is an example of a very few pieces, that come together to create the upper. And maybe we should leave that out, because I think I'm going to just kind of reference this. So the
Hold
upper.
a little higher.
Well, if you're looking here for a video, you can look, but if you're not, just imagine. So the upper is from the what you consider the midsole and sole up, and so this particular one is glued onto some foam, and you can see that there's different parts of the upper. So there's the toe box, which would be in the front, the sides, foxing, the heel and heel counter is in the back, and of course the laces and things up on top, and tongue. So it was once thought. So just picture this. This in the 70s, 60s, late 60s. I don't remember when this was. So I guess early 70s, maybe 72. You're a sneakerhead.
Yeah, let me look at my husband.
So
would know this answer.
Yeah, so it's probably around there. These were used in marathons, and so people would run these as recreational runners and high-level runners.
72.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Yeah,
yes,
that's great.
Yeah. So, and you can. This is really great. We'll talk about this next time. But running injuries has not changed the entire time that we've had footwear in the running world. It's always been the same. So we think about all these injuries and mechanisms and all tied to footwear, but the reality is, whether it's a stability shoe, we can talk about this maybe a little bit more next time, but whether it's a stability shoe or Nike Free, which really was designed with the barefoot runner in mind.
Yeah.
So it's well tested in the lab, and but there's no difference in injury between. Let's just pick. I like this one. This has a heel counter that's embedded inside the shoe, and you can by pushing on it. This is I'm pushing on the heel. It's very hard. It's not like the front part where it's you can bend it and move it and squeeze it, and the heel is made to control and contour your heel. And so it was once thought, it is even today, but hopefully this example will tell you, So in a shoe that's normally constructed that can be considered a neutral shoe, there's a heel counter that controls it. It controls the calcaneus, or the rear foot. Well, let's look at the free. So I have a free here somewhere. I don't have one, but I can pick one up maybe later.
Yeah, I think most people know what frees look
yeah,
like
so
nowadays.
the free is
it's real thin and like
it has no heel counter.
floppy. Yeah.
It folds over like a slipper.
Mm-hmm.
So why is it that now controlling the rear foot, i.e. calcaneus, is so important when it's not important in the free? Or it doesn't exist in the free. It's not controlling that in any way. So that this idea of being able to control the foot so that you can have less injuries is probably not true. We'll go over some research next
That's
time about
mind-blowing.
that. But it's now we can go to. Am I spoiling next week? We'll stop there.
Okay.
Maybe in the part 2, we'll get into some articles, recent articles, old articles, some ones that I think are outstanding in the way of their quality, and we'll review those.
Yeah.
So that's it. That's kind of we'll stop there. But
Okay.
so with the construction piece, we'll just keep going. So also, it's not part of the upper necessarily, but inside there's a number of things. Yours is glued in there, so I'm not going to pull it out.
I'm sorry if it stinks a little bit.
Oh, I'm not even worried about that. So you have, there's lots of terms for this. I used sock liner because that's what it is. It's just a 3mm foam insert that helps your foot contour to the inside of the shoe. Because if you think about parts of the shoe, they're the interface is hard, so you've got this connection between the soft upper, and now there's the midsole, which consists of either foam, some variation of foam.
Midsole's the bottom thick part.
Yeah.
on
So
most shoes.
again, ethyl EVA is consistently what's used for foam, ethyl vinyl acetate. So whether it's in a form like the Cortez. So if you can picture a Cortez, and if you're driving, don't go on the internet. But there's different colors. You've got the white, the blue, as the midsole, and it's a sheet of foam that's, pick a number, 5 feet by whatever, 20 feet, and they're taking a cookie cutter and cutting this exact shape, and then they take the blue one. And they take a cookie cutter and they smash the blue one. And so it literally is a die. You push 2 buttons and the die cuts the sheet of EVA. And that's how these first shoes were developed and manufactured. It's a different process, but to get the complexity in design, so you can pick the Hokas, there's ribs and details and some intricate patterns here. And
Hokas are very popular now. People love these things.
I wore these shoes for years, or maybe a couple years anyway, and they were great. I didn't like to run in them. We'll talk about that later. But they're a great shoe. And this also kind of points to. So there's minimalist shoes, free, Vibrams, all of those that would be minimalist. And now there's maximalist shoes. There's no difference in injury rates between barefoot running, a minimalist shoe, a normal shoe, and maximalist shoe. So the historical injury rates for running have not changed.
That is interesting.
So that's just something I think we need to remember when, especially as PTs, people come in and are passionate about footwear. Maybe they wore Saucony's or some brand that they're really, I don't know about loyal. Yeah, they could be loyal to, but it's just that what fits their foot, and they've run in and I believe the anecdotal evidence when someone shifts to a different footwear and their foot hurts. And as a biological system, our ability to adapt is premier. And so that's what we do. And so injury really is our body's failure to adapt. So I think if we use those terms, that different footwear fits your foot different, and it causes a little bit different way that you load. And I think that's true, but I don't think that's related to injury. I think over time your body adapts, and it's not footwear.
Mm-hmm.
It's your body willing to adapt. We can go into that, I think, next time.
Yeah.
And I might have to review this, so remember what I said what I was going to do next time?
I'll remember. I'll take some
Okay,
notes.
good, because I
Yeah.
think some of that is also, there's some really great evidence to say, no matter your running style, whether it's a forefoot or a heel,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's barefoot or shod,
Mm-hmm.
the magnitude at which you land is exactly the same. Or it's less than 10%.
Mm-hmm.
There's a 10% variation in the type of footwear, the type of terrain, and the type of running style in the load that your body's exposed. So we'll get into that, some of the details.
Yeah.
I think it's important just because it does link to materials, and it links to construction. It links
Mm-hmm.
to the type of midsole available. So as an example, the Vaporfly 4%, is that what the name of this one is?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this one was kind of a more recent one that was, I love it, brilliant. This was the shoe that helped Iliad run in under 2 hours in a marathon. So if you have
It's
a chance, there's a couple documentaries on that. Breaking 2 is a really great documentary when he didn't break it, which is kind of funny. That was done a couple years ago, 3 years ago maybe. But the most recent one, when meaning Iliad, broke the 2 hour barrier in the marathon, was wearing these shoes. This was constructed in much the same way. It still has an upper, still has a midsole, it has a sock liner, it has an outsole, and if you're seeing, we have a cross sectional area. Kind of, I cut it in half.
I can zoom in on
And
that.
you can kind of see that cross-sectional area. I don't know if you can zoom if you'd like, but
Yeah.
I'll
It might just be. That's fine.
That's fine. Is
Yeah,
that
that's
good?
great. That's a
Yeah.
great
So
view.
that's good view. So the construction is very similar. You can see that there's a bunch of things that need to be stitched together. You can see that the heel counter. I'm pushing on the heel counter,
Mm-hmm.
and it's collapsing. So here's one that maybe is not cut apart, but you can push on that heel counter, and it's much less stable than some of these other shoes. As an example here, this Saucony shoe, that heel counter. I mean, you really can't push it over.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's got that really basic, like thick foam
Does-
look or
yeah. I mean the
padded look.
Yeah, the padded look, the way that
Lots of
the
material.
foam, so the foam that runs around the edges here, it's padded so that it cushions, below your malleoli, your ankle bones, and then
Mm-hmm.
also kind of cradles the Achilles tendon. So, and that was designed on purpose so that it was more comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
But you can see even in this shoe, now interestingly, this was really made, and we can kind of get into that. This was made for a 4-foot striker in mind.
Mm-hmm.
So if you just look at the construction, you can see, well, there's just EVA, and so there's a little bit of rubber on the heel, but most of the rubber is on the forefoot.
Oh, I
And
see.
so,
Interesting. So he's showing the bottom of the shoe.
showing the bottom of the
and,
shoe.
like the ball of the foot is
Yeah.
black.
So from
Looks like
the
it's
front half of your foot, where your forefoot is, it's black because it's a different material that was glued. So essentially, this is this very simple shoe. Go back to the Cortez. The midsole consists of 2 sheets of EVA that are glued together. The upper then is glued on to that EVA. It's got some elements in here. I think it's a strobel. Yeah. So there's a footbed that's non-woven that gives it some stiffness.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a kind of a cardboard material in this particular shoe. So it gives it some stiffness. And then you have the outsole. So the outsole here is a variation of rubber, and it is also glued to the midsole. So in this particular Cortez example, very simple in its construction, simple in its design, simple in its manufacturing. So the elements here are, I think, just a good example.
It's so cute, too.
Well,
it's a cute shoe.
Okay, I was in junior high when this came out. So is that right? I think so.
72?
I was 72, so that would have been. I guess I was not quite in junior high. I was in grade school.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it was in junior high by the time I realized this was cool. So so a few years later, I realized that this was like the best shoe ever. So when I got this shoe when I was in, I think, 7th or 8th grade, it was a big deal. So
didn't Farrah Fawcett make it really popular too?
Well, boy, that's a great question. Maybe, yeah, look that up, because there could have been some Farrah Fawcett posters. Yeah, I was not allowed to, by the way, but I maybe had some friends who had some lockers that had that picture in it. So
here she is, such a risque photo.
Oh, there she is on a skateboard. Yeah, that's it. The must-have back then.
Cute.
So I don't know. I just thought the Cortez was just a good example of a non-complicated footwear that's simple to understand in its processes. So so similar. So this. So to keep going, so this is I'm holding what looks like, it's called a last, and it's a foot form. So it's the shape of a foot, but in its gross form. It doesn't have any toes. It just looks like if you were to take a mold of the inside of a shoe, that's what this would be.
It's like a giant plastic, those little inserts that keep the form of a shoe.
Yeah, so if you were to look at boots, and if you were, this would be something to keep boots stretched, or keep them at at the appropriate size. And so this is how footwear is manufactured. So this fits on a little post, and it's upside down, and you've sewn the upper together. And so in the Cortez example, it's got, if I had to count real quick, it might have 6 pieces. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Something like that's a pretty good guess. So there's maybe 6 pieces of leather here, and they all have to be stitched together. So the first process really is kind of stitching. I guess I forgot about the tongue. The tongue would be different, but so the materials then are stitched together in the design that was determined by design and marketing, and that's flat. So you think about just it lays flat. So you have to stitch it flat. So it just folds out like you would if you're familiar with just watching someone sew, or if you're familiar with seamstress or seamster. Kind of think of a material as being flat, but it's got to then it's got to look three-dimensional when it's done. So there's some design and engineering elements around how to make that fit and make it look like a shoe. So then the upper, after it's stitched together with the type of lasting, so in this case a strobel lasting, non-woven material that you stitch the upper to, so then you can put it on the last. So that foot form, or that material, then gets put onto this hard plastic piece, and it gets stretched over the top, and now you're exposing the bottom, and so then you mate the midsole and outsole to the upper. So that's kind of the process, and currently most of that is automated. So this sticks into a machine, and then it stretches that material over it, so it's a nice fit. And then you put glue, and then you can glue the midsole and outsole on. So it's, a lot of times it's a couple different processes where the midsole goes on first, or you sometimes will put the outsole, glued it onto the midsole, and then attach the midsole to the last. So that's I think that's kind of the basics of the construction of footwear.
Yeah.
It's consistent with any brand. So if you were to go overseas, I wondered if I did this on another podcast, but I don't think so. If you were to go, let's to Southeast Asia somewhere, and there's a region of, I was over there, it was Guangzhou, and there was many footwear factories owned by locals, and then, contracted out by, Nike, Adidas, the rest. So being in materials, I was aware of, the same materials are being delivered into, so there's material manufacturers. So let's pick synthetic leather. There's a bunch of shoes here. I think the Cortez are real leather. But let's pick, let's pick real leather, because I think that's a good example too. So this leather is tanned. It's got a coating on it. So this particular one, they also has a So it's got a very thin coating. So the white is paint. If you think about it that way.
Yeah.
So the white is actually paint. So they paint the leather, and then they use a emboss, so you can see very closely that there's this small, there's little tiny texture. So that's also that's inside the top coat. So this would be the same leather as a couch, be the same leather as boots, depending on the quality of what you're trying to produce. In this particular one, there's probably some blemishes in here, but it's painted so you can't see it. And then the more that you emboss it, the more that you put texture on it. So you can think of a dashboard or some other couch that has, if it's a leather or synthetic leather couch, it'll have a grain to it, and that's some of that is natural, some of it's an emboss, and so there's, pick a number, a handful, a couple leather suppliers, in China. At least back when I was there. So there wasn't very many. So they're supplying everybody with leather. Now there's some high-end leathers we use for some high-end shoes. So when we made, shoes for Kobe or LeBron, Carmelo that wanted to use their shoe, to go out and, in the evening we might get some leather that was exotic. So there's really high-end leathers for sure. That get their, the raw materials from countries that are higher quality, and then there's lower cost materials, leathers that maybe have more blemishes, and so it costs less. So it runs the gamut for sure, but there's still only a handful of leather manufacturing.
So it's all about the marketing.
And they all supply all the footwear.
Yeah.
And bags. If you think about not just footwear, they're supplying bags and coats and all of the accessories, and they're supplying. It's likely the same leather as you would on again, it's the continuum. So if you were to get some super high end, what they call coach leather, well, it's going to be tanned and manufactured a little bit differently, than some other less expensive. But essentially, the suppliers would pull up and deliver the raw material, not raw, but the leather to Nike for use in. So big hides would come in rolls and stacks of hides, and so this the thing that I was telling you about that clicked and made the midsoles, it's actually called a clicker. I know, isn't that funny?
Innovative.
Yeah, you cut out materials with the same thing. So you have a die, and you put, this is in its simple form. They have much more complicated ways to do it now. It's all, you can do it on a laser cutting machine. You can get it all really dialed in, and but simply, it still is a piece of leather that is laid out, and then you have a cookie cutter. It's the shape of, in this particular heel counter. So if you were to lay this out, it would be long and skinny with a little it tapers down to the sides and goes up on the top or in the middle. And
Mhm.
so, and you would just use a clicker, and you would click that shape out, and then that's how they use that shape then to sew to the other shapes that you've cut out. So like, around the laces here is they've used some leather to give it some support, and that's just a horseshoe. And you have all these dies and all these horseshoe, dies on the leather, and they, smash it down and they cut it out. And so that's the pieces. And so, so just leather as an example, the same people that are making it are driving to all these different footwear companies. So Nike's getting the same leather as Adidas, who's getting the same level of leather as Reebok.
Mhm.
So that's leather. Synthetic leather's the same. So here's a Saucony shoe. It's got synthetic leather. It's got these the toe here. The toe. It's got a kind of a shiny. There's some matte and shine to it, but that's synthetic leather. So it's a non-woven material that then has paint. Essentially painted on it. It's I guess it's different than paint, but you can think about it. It's just a thick coating that they pour on top of this non-woven material, and it makes synthetic. It's not a real leather. It's a synthetic leather, and then you can see on this one too. There's other elements of this that are synthetic leather, and there's textile. There's a mesh, so you can kind of think of a tongue in a running shoe as mesh. This rest of the rest of this footwear is mesh and synthetic leather. Well, that mesh textile, there's only a handful of companies that make textiles in the form of this mesh, and that same company is supplying the same manufacturers synthetic, the textiles.
Mm-hmm.
So. The same materials are being used, for the most part, on every type of shoe known in these particular examples.
Mm-hmm.
There's Allbirds, and it's a different brand,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so there's clearly some materials that are specialized. Allbirds. So I said all brands. It's Allbirds.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
which is it's a wool, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I don't know.
So, so it's a and Birkenstocks, and so there's other types of footwear that that clearly material's different, but for we're talking about really running shoes, they're pretty much the same. So we have this idea that they're so uniquely different that it can only fit into a Saucony or Adidas or a Nike, and but I kind of wanted to dispel that there might be some quality differences in some of the materials.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give that to it because I think there's elements of that. But for the most part, the materials are consistently similar. We'll say that. I like that. They're consistently similar across all manufacturers.
So, like, if you were to get a shoe at, I don't know, is Payless Shoe Source still a thing?
Don't know, but
So
yeah, let's pick Payless.
If you get a shoe at Payless,
Walmart brand or something.
Walmart,
Yeah.
Even Amazon probably has
Yeah,
shoes
yeah,
now
yeah,
that
yeah,
are really
yeah.
feel cheaply made versus
Yeah,
like getting
yeah.
a real Nike Cortez, not like the knockoff. So there would be differences in quality in terms of
Yes.
they last longer, they'd be more
Yep.
durable.
Yep. Yeah, so if you think about durability, well, that really has to do with some of the hardness and firmness and in the outsole itself and midsole. So there clearly is some quality differences, but I would say across the top, I don't know, pick 10 brands.
Mhm.
I bet you they're really similar.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Some of the cheaper brands, you've got to make it cheaper, to have
Mhm.
merchandising price points that go from, the $250, Vaporfly 4% to, some less expensive brand.
$10 Walmart.
Yeah, $10 Walmart. So
I'm sure we'll get into that with the injuries too. If
Yeah.
you were to run in a less than desirable shoe, some people probably could do it, but probably wouldn't be desirable for like a marathon runner or somebody who's a really serious athlete. They'd want a more durable shoe.
It's hard. I don't know. That's a great question.
That could be tough. But
so Bill Bowerman was also one of the founders of Nike. So he was a University of Oregon track coach. So in the day, I don't know him and never met him well before my time. But you hear stories about he wanted to construct a shoe that would only last a mile because weight was a big deal back then. You can imagine people are running in this Cortez. I guess it was a little maybe before the Cortez. But you get it. It was the Tigers. There was other brands that I think Adidas had a brand that was similar. Not Adidas brand. It had a model that was similar. The idea was to make it as light and as disposable as possible, and they did that. So there are stories of shoes that would make it a mile or maybe a little more than, and that was part of I think how Nike used innovation to create product. Yeah, early on. No, I love the stories for sure.
Well, I'm looking forward to getting into some of the injury talk because I know that's a huge question for people, but it's nice to know the design and kind of the genesis behind footwear, because so often I hear people talking about shoes and kind of have all this misinformation about this shoe is better than this one and this material is different, and sometimes when it's a good quality shoe, you're saying there's not a whole lot of difference.
I'm gonna just pull up maybe. So here's a example of a free. So I have a free in my hand, and then I also have pick the Hokas.
Yeah.
Right. So
very different, minimalist and maximalist.
Yeah. So it's a minimalist and maximalist, and although the free here is cut in half, just trying to fold this shoe in half is a challenge.
The Hoka.
The Hoka here is for those that don't know, this is a maximalist shoe, and it's got it's 50 millimeters maybe. I think what was once thought important was this drop, heel to toe drop, and so this is consistent with kind of a standard shoe as far as its percent drop, but it's well cushioned. And then we can go to the free, which is maybe a third the size, as far as its cushioning, but you can roll this up in a ball. Right, and we can do that. We can just roll this thing up, and it will actually fit in your pocket, because it's that minimalist. Like we had talked about, that heel counter is non-existent. If you're watching the video, you can take this heel counter, and it is not providing any stability for the calcaneus. Zero. If you think of barefoot running, it's zero stability in in your skin holding your calcaneus together. So where was I going with that? So
we're talking about
So just still construction. So the construction between these two shoes, the Hoka and the Free, are as great as you can imagine. Now there's no plate fiber, so there actually is a carbon fiber plate inside the Vaporfly 4% here, and what it does, I'm going to direct you to another podcast that we did with Allison.
Yeah, it's a great one. If you haven't listened to
Modiferi about footwear
and
running. We talked more about running, but our bodies behave. I guess we'll just do just a brief review if you don't want to go back to that, and we'll finish maybe with this. If you think of someone that's an amputee in the Paralympics, they have a big giant spring on the end of their foot, and it's usually made up of titanium and carbon fiber or some alloy, and so when they land, it compresses the spring, and then the spring releases its energy and pushes you forward. So that was the idea behind here, and so there's actually a carbon fiber plate that goes from the forefoot to the heel. So as you land and compress and load the spring, so as you're loading the spring during your loading phase of running, and as you release the energy, you're minimizing energy loss and maximizing the storage of energy inside the carbon fiber plate. So in this particular instance, this was banned by running. So Marathon and USOC banned this because they thought it was too much technology because it stored too much energy.
They gave too much of an advantage.
They
to
gave
people
too
that
much
weren't.
advantage to those people that weren't. But again, this is footwear construction. So basketball. We'll go to basketball. Basketball has elements of this in it, and it had been since I've been around in footwear. So in early 2000s, they already had stiffening components because again, you wanted to minimize minimize energy loss, and that was the way to stiffen it up to make it more stable. And so that's in this design. This was really designed as storage of energy, so it would minimize your energy cost. We'll get into that next week too, because there's actual data, physiology data, and biomechanics data. So in the way of stress and strain data on the shoe, we can show those differences, and then how that resulted in faster performance. We can do the math together and see how much actually that this improved.
Dang. So did any shoes from the NBA get banned?
We
carbon fiber?
after I left, there was we actually developed shoes that were the same idea, same concept, where we actually had 2 full-length carbon fiber plates. So these are pretty thin. We had some really massive carbon fiber plates. If you think about running versus basketball,
You got more massive.
yeah, I
heels.
mean the average size in the NBA back then was a size 16 at 220 pounds, 240 pounds. A runner is $120.
Right.
So it was equivalent really. So we had 2 full-length carbon fiber plates in there. The prototypes that we built, tested in the lab, it made you jump higher. And so I left shortly thereafter, but they kind of continued to develop some of those, and that was fun. Actually, it was my idea. So again, would take the design in my head and put it on a computer and send it downstairs and get a lab, mold made, and the typical carbon fiber plates I could have manufactured somewhere else to have a nice curve in it so it would fit inside the shoe, and so I like to build things. So that was fun.
Yeah, that's cool.
And so I do kind of understand some of the ways, the manufacturing of technology, of footwear, and the technology behind it.
Yeah, that's really cool. I'm really excited to get into then maybe talking about ways that we can help folks reduce injuries depending on what their sport is, or improve their performance, or what kind of things matter and what don't.
And I think we went through the Cortez on the the kind of the upper and then the midsole. Just to finish up, this is the same. I mean, it looks so much different, but these different colors. I'm holding up a Saucony. You can see some blues and some grays and some blacks, but that's all just EVA foam that's in a different, it's an injected molded EVA, so it's the same ethylene vinyl acetate, it's just in a different form rather than in a sheet, and they squirt it into a mold, and then that's how these are made. But it's very similar. The upper then is attached to the last, and then the footwear, the midsole, is then stuck on the upper with the last. So so there's a lot of similarities in the way that footwear is constructed, and any one of these, for the most part, is constructed the same.
Yeah.
Or very similar.
Well, thanks for the quick tutorial on how to design a shoe. Like, I never thought there was so much, so many different moving parts, and honestly, I never even thought about what the construction of a shoe would look like. So appreciate that crash course, and I'm looking forward to kind of busting some myths around what's really important with footwear, because now that we know how it's made, we can't escape some of the facts that you're going to drop on us next week.
So those that are really geeky, you can make this yourself. Patterns are simple. You can do the pattern. You can sew it yourself. you can get a sheet of whatever, and you can cut it out, and you can actually make your own shoe.
Didn't Bill Bowerman do that?
Yeah, I mean,
before Nike was...
sure. And so
That's how it was the genesis. Is just creating
Phil Knight with the. If you have a chance, the Shoe Dog is actually it's a great book to read. It follows the history of Nike and Phil Knight and in that group. So yeah, go make a shoe because it's just really fun.
All right, I'm on it. Can't wait to cover injuries and
next time. I'm ready. I'm going to bring some articles. We'll link a bunch of articles with that, we'll make sure you can find those. We'll talk about what I think are the stronger arguments against footwear causing injury, and even bring up some recent footwear articles. Injury mechanism articles that we can talk about. So.
Sweet. Well, thanks for your brain and dropping all the science that you just did about how shoes are constructed. This is exciting.
Cool.
Okay, see you next week.
Thanks, JD.
You bet. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in. And just make sure you're connecting with us in some way, whether it would be liking or subscribing. You can connect with us directly, and be sure to visit our website, motifcenter.com. And if you want to be featured in our Q&A, send us a question. We'll be happy to answer that in our Q&A session, and let us know where you're coming from.